The sun was sinking behind the desert hills, painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold, when Clara May stepped onto the cracked earth that once belonged to her late father. She was no more than 18, an orphan with a single suitcase, and a letter that named her the new owner of the old ranch everyone in town had forgotten. The wind howled through the ghostly fences, whispering stories of men who had once bled and dreamed on that same soil. For most folks, it was nothing but a stretch of dust and memory, but to Clara, it was all she had left of her bloodline. And though she didn't know it yet, the land carried a secret that would change her life forever. The townspeople had pitied her when she arrived. A girl alone can't manage a ranch, they'd muttered behind her back. But there was a quiet fire in Clara's eyes, a spark of the same courage that had made her father a legend in these parts. She wasn't there to sell it or run from it. She was there to rebuild. Each step she took across the dry yard stirred up ghosts of cattle drives and campfires, of laughter that once filled the barn she now feared to open. They said it had been locked since the night her father died. They said no one dared to touch it. When she finally reached the barn, the hinges screamed like a dying beast. The smell of old hay and rust filled the air, mixed with something else, something faint, like metal glimmering beneath the dust. The sunlight cut through the wooden slats, forming golden beams that danced across the forgotten tools and broken saddles. Clara's hand trembled as she brushed aside a pile of straw. Beneath it lay a wooden chest sealed with an iron latch. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from a deep sense of destiny. She remembered her father's final words, murmured through fever and pain. "The land will take care of you, Clara. When the time comes, you'll understand." For years she thought it was just the delirium of a dying man. But now, standing before that chest, something inside her told her he had been right. Every echo in that barn, every gust of wind through the rafters seemed to whisper the same thing. This land wasn't cursed. It was waiting. With the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders, Clara reached for the latch. The sun had dipped below the ridge now, casting the world in amber twilight. As the chest creaked open, her breath caught. What she saw inside didn't just belong to her father. It belonged to a legacy far older than her family name. And as the first spark of gold caught the fading light, she realized the truth. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about destiny carved in the dust of the desert. The night that followed Clara's discovery was sleepless. The image of the golden glint buried in that old chest replayed in her mind like a restless echo. When dawn broke over the barren hills, she finally gathered the courage to open it completely. Inside were pouches of raw gold, tarnished by time, but unmistakable in their shimmer. Her father had hidden a fortune beneath the same roof where she used to play as a child. Yet, the treasure wasn't what struck her most. It was the folded map lying on top, drawn by a trembling hand she instantly recognized. Her father had marked the entire ranch, with one particular spot circled deep in the desert where no one dared to go. The townsfolk would have sold everything the moment they saw gold, but Clara was different. She didn't see wealth. She saw a message, a trail her father wanted her to follow. Every mark on that map told a story. Each symbol carved in the parchment was a clue, a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. She packed a canteen, a revolver, and her father's old hat, the one that still smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. Then, before sunrise, she saddled the same horse that had once carried her father across the plains and set out toward the circle drawn on the map. The journey through the desert was brutal. The wind cut through her clothes like knives, and the horizon shimmered with heat that bent reality itself. Buzzards followed her shadow, as if they could sense her uncertainty. But Clara pressed on, guided by a memory stronger than fear. The image of her father standing tall against the setting sun, telling her, a rancher's worth ain't in her land, but in how far she's willing to ride for it. Those words became her compass when her strength began to fade. By the third day, her supplies were nearly gone. The last drops of water clung to the bottom of her canteen, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. But then, out of the haze, she saw it. An old windmill half buried in sand. Beneath it, a small stone marker stood, almost swallowed by the desert. As she brushed away the dirt, she found carved initials. J.M., her father's name, John Miller. She knelt there, trembling, realizing that this was where he had made his final stand, where he had buried not just gold, but something deeper. As she dug beside the stone, her fingers met cold metal once more. Another chest, smaller than the first, emerged from the earth. Inside, wrapped in a torn cloth, was a single journal, its pages brittle but intact. On the first page, her father's handwriting read, "For the one who still believes in what can't be seen." Clara's throat tightened as tears blurred her vision. Whatever lay beyond those words, she knew, it wasn't about the gold anymore. It was about uncovering the truth her father had died to protect. Back at the ranch, the whispers began to spread like wildfire. Folks in town had seen her riding out into the desert alone, and rumors followed her home before she even returned. Some said she'd gone mad chasing ghosts. Others claimed she'd found outlaw gold and was hiding it. When Clara finally rode back, her clothes torn and face burned by the sun, the townspeople watched her every move. She ignored their stares. The journal never left her hands. Inside its pages, her father had written about an ancient vein of gold that ran beneath their land, untouched, cursed, and hidden since the time of the Apache Wars. But the words carried more warning than promise. He wrote of nights filled with strange sounds, whispers rising from the canyon, shapes moving where no wind should blow. He believed the land was alive, guarding something far greater than gold. The deeper she read, the more Clara understood that her father's life had been a battle between duty and fear. He had protected the secret because he knew what greed could do to a man's soul. Now that burden had fallen on her shoulders, and the question burned inside her. Should she keep it hidden too, or risk everything to uncover it completely? The following days, Clara began restoring the ranch. It was the only way she knew to stay sane. She mended fences, scrubbed walls, and reopened the old well that had long run dry. Each creak of the wood, each sound of a nail being hammered, felt like breathing life back into a ghost. But at night, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. Sometimes she heard footsteps near the barn, the faint jingle of spurs in the dark. Other times, she'd wake to find the lantern swinging gently, though no wind had entered the room. One night, unable to bear it, she took her father's revolver and stepped outside. The moon hung high and cold, painting the sand in silver. She followed the sound, slow, steady, human. It led her to the edge of the corral, where a stranger stood leaning against the fence. His clothes were ragged, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "You must be John Miller's girl," he said softly, his voice low and rough. Clara didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled faintly. "Someone who owes your father a debt. And someone who knows what you found in that barn." The desert wind froze. For the first time, Clara felt a flicker of real fear. This man wasn't guessing. He knew. Before she could speak again, he took a slow step forward. "That gold," he said, "ain't what you think it is. It belonged to men who never made it back from the war. And if you ain't careful, miss, they'll come for it still." His words hung heavy in the air. By the time she blinked, he was gone, vanished into the night as if he had never been there. But his warning had sunk deep, and Clara realized her father's secret wasn't buried alone beneath the desert. It was still alive, and now it was coming for her. The following morning, Clara woke with the unease still coiled in her chest. The stranger's words haunted her thoughts like a storm that refused to pass. She searched the yard for any trace of him. Hoof prints, footprints, anything. But the sand was smooth, untouched, as if the desert itself had swallowed the manhole. She tried to convince herself it was just exhaustion or a mirage born from too many sleepless nights. Yet something deep inside told her he had been real. And worse, that he wasn't the only one who knew her secret. Determined not to let fear rule her, Clara returned to her father's journal. Between the entries about ranch life and his notes on the land, she noticed something strange. Some pages had been torn out, leaving only ragged edges and traces of ink that bled through the paper. Near the back, she found a note hidden inside the binding. "If they come asking about the vein, trust no one from town." The handwriting was shaky, hurried, almost desperate. A chill ran through her as she realized the man from last night could have been one of those her father had warned her about. That afternoon, She rode into town to buy supplies. The saloon went quiet the moment she stepped inside. Every eye turned toward her. The orphaned ranch girl who had inherited a desert no one wanted, until rumors of gold began to spread. The barkeep, a heavy-set man with a scar across his cheek, gave her a cautious smile. "Heard you've been busy, Miss Miller," he said. "Folks say your daddy left you something special." Clara forced a smile. "Just dust and fences," she replied. But the way his gaze lingered told her he didn't believe it. Neither did the men whispering at the back tables. When she returned home that evening, her barn door was open. The padlock lay broken in the dirt. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, revolver drawn. Everything looked untouched, except the chest. It was gone. Panic struck like lightning. Whoever had come knew exactly what they were looking for. She searched the ground and found boot prints, 2 sets, leading away toward the canyon. Rage and fear tangled inside her, but above them both rose determination. Her father had fought to protect that secret. She would not let thieves steal it. As the last light of day vanished behind the cliffs, Clara packed her rifle, mounted her horse, and followed the tracks into the darkness. The desert night was merciless, cold, vast, and silent except for the rhythmic pounding of hooves. She didn't know what waited ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever was buried beneath that land wasn't meant for greedy hands. And if her father's spirit still lingered in those sands, she wouldn't let it rest in vain. By midnight, Clara reached the canyon. The moonlight revealed the faint outline of a campfire flickering between the rocks. She dismounted quietly, heart thundering, and crawled closer. 2 men sat near the flames, rough, sunburned faces, their laughter carrying the arrogance of men who believed they'd already won. The chest sat between them, its lid open, gold spilling like sunlight onto the dirt. One of the men, tall and gaunt with a patch over his left eye, said, "Told you the girl wouldn't put up a fight. Ranchers' kids are all the same, soft inside." The other chuckled. "Soft or not, she found what no one else could. Maybe we ought to pay her another visit, just in case she's hiding more." Clara's blood boiled. She steadied her breath and aimed the rifle. But before she could act, a gust of wind swept through the canyon, snuffing out the fire in an instant. The men cursed, stumbling in the darkness. A low, eerie hum echoed through the rocks, like the earth itself was whispering. The men froze, fear etched across their faces. "Did you hear that?" one hissed. Then came another sound, a faint rattling, like chains dragging over stone. Clara felt it too, a vibration through the ground, a presence that didn't belong to the living. Suddenly, the gold inside the chest shimmered unnaturally, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The men staggered back. One screamed, "It's cursed. He told us it was cursed." They bolted into the darkness, their shouts fading into the distance. Clara remained still, clutching her rifle, the hair on her arms standing on end. When she finally dared to move closer, she saw something that made her heart stop, an old leather glove resting beside the chest. Her father's glove. It hadn't been there before. Her breath caught as she knelt and touched it. The air grew colder, and for a brief moment, she swore she heard his voice, faint but clear, carried by the desert wind. "You've done enough, Clara. Let it rest." Tears stung her eyes. She didn't know if it was real or the desert playing tricks, but the message was unmistakable. Her father's battle wasn't against men. It was against the greed that gold awakened. And now that burden had found her. As dawn crept over the horizon, Clara closed the chest once more. She didn't take the gold. She buried it deeper than before, sealing it beneath the same rocks that had guarded it for decades. The men who had come for it would return, but when they did, they'd find nothing but dust and echoes. For the first time in years, the land felt still, as if it had been waiting for her to finish what her father started. And though she didn't yet know it, this was only the beginning of the legacy she was meant to carry. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Clara worked the land from sunrise to dusk, her body moving by instinct while her mind wrestled with what she had seen. The golden light in the canyon haunted her dreams, and sometimes, when the wind swept through the valley just right, she swore she could hear distant whispers echoing her father's words. Still, the ranch began to change, slowly but surely. The well filled again with clean water, Wildflowers sprouted near the fence line, and even the soil seemed softer beneath her boots. It was as though the desert, after years of grief, was beginning to breathe again. One afternoon, as Clara fixed the corral gate, a rider appeared on the horizon. His horse was coated in dust, his hat pulled low, his shadow long against the fading sun. She reached for her revolver, ready for another intruder, but when he drew closer, she saw the face of a man not older than 30, with kind but weary eyes. "Name's Eli Turner," he said, tipping his hat. "Your father and I worked together once. He helped me when I had nothing. I heard folks in town talking. Figured you might need a friend more than they'll ever admit." Clara hesitated, her instincts torn between caution and the desperate ache of loneliness. For weeks, she had spoken only to the wind. "If you're here for gold," she warned, "you'd best turn around now." Eli chuckled softly. "Gold's cursed, Miss Miller. Always has been. I'm just looking to pay an old debt." His voice carried a quiet honesty that disarmed her defenses. Against her better judgment, she let him stay the night. Over the next few days, Eli helped repair the barn roof, clear the fields, and rebuild the ranch's fences. He spoke little about himself, but the way he treated the land, with reverence, not greed, reminded Clara of her father. Together, they began to restore what had long been forgotten. Still, Clara noticed how Eli's gaze would often wander toward the hills at dusk, as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she finally asked, "What is it you're not telling me?" Eli looked into the flames for a long while before answering. "Your father didn't just hide gold," he said quietly. "He hid what men died protecting, something sacred. And if the wrong people find out it's still buried here, they'll come for it. They already are." Clara's breath caught. "Then what was it?" she whispered. Eli's eyes lifted to hers, dark with truth. "Not gold, Clara. Not anymore. It's a promise. One that's worth more than any treasure." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Eli's words spun through her mind like wind through dry grass. A promise. What kind of promise was worth blood, betrayal, and decades of silence? When dawn broke, she returned to her father's journal, reading it again from the beginning, this time searching not for gold, but for meaning. In one faded entry, she found a line she'd missed before. "Some treasures ain't meant to be owned. They're meant to be guarded until the world's ready for them again." Determined to uncover the truth, Clara and Eli rode out to the canyon together. The desert stretched endlessly around them, every dune whispering secrets from the past. When they reached the spot where she'd buried the chest, Clara dismounted and began to dig, her hands raw and trembling. Hours passed before the edge of the wooden lid appeared beneath the sand. But when she lifted it open, there was no gold, only a bundle of old letters, wrapped in oilcloth, and a small leather pouch containing a single iron key. Eli knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. "Those letters," he said, "they might be the reason men killed for this land." Clara unfolded the first one, her father's handwriting mingled with another, someone who signed each page with the name Captain Isaac Monroe. The letters spoke of an agreement between a group of men who had once served in the army, men who had found something in the desert during the war, something ancient, buried deep beneath the mesas. They had vowed to protect it, swearing secrecy under oath. Her father had been the last of them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in blood and fire, Clara held the key in her palm, its weight both physical and symbolic. "So this is what they were after," she said softly. "Not gold. Knowledge. A secret buried long before we were born." Eli nodded. "And that secret might be the kind of thing the world shouldn't dig up again." The wind began to rise, carrying the scent of rain from far off in the mountains. For the first time in years, thunder rolled across the desert. Clara looked at the horizon, at the land her father had died to protect, and felt the truth settle in her bones. She had inherited more than soil and dust. She had inherited duty. The kind of duty that binds generations together, built not on greed, but on faith. And as lightning struck somewhere beyond the canyon ridge, Clara knew this was no longer her father's story. It was hers now. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the desert drenched and glistening under the early light. Clara stood at the barn doorway, the iron key in her hand, its surface still cold from the night. She didn't know what had opened, but deep down, she sensed it wasn't meant for anything ordinary. Eli joined her, his hat pulled low against the brightness. "There's an old mine west of here," he said quietly. "Your father mentioned it once. Said it was sealed before you were born. If that key belongs anywhere, it's there." Clara hesitated. The thought of descending into the earth sent a chill through her. But something inside her, something stronger than fear, whispered that she had to know. They rode for hours through broken canyons and dry riverbeds until the land grew rough and silent. At last, they reached a narrow ravine where the rocks seemed to lean inward, hiding a dark opening. The entrance was half buried under rubble, with an iron door bolted across it, rusted but still intact. The key fit perfectly. As the lock clicked open, a hollow echo rolled through the canyon, like the desert itself exhaling. Eli raised the lantern, casting light on the tunnel ahead. "After you," he said with a nervous grin. Clara took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, heavy with the scent of iron and dust. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed, from rough stone to carvings, symbols etched by hands long gone. Clara ran her fingers over one of them. "These ain't from the miners," she whispered. Eli nodded grimly. "Older. Much older." When the tunnel widened into a cavern, they found a single wooden crate in the center, sealed with wax and rope. Beside it lay a metal plaque bearing the same initials carved into her father's stone marker, J.M. Clara knelt and touched the box. "He was here," she murmured. Her hands trembled as she pulled the seal apart and lifted the lid. Inside lay relics, coins, maps, and a cloth-wrap bundle. When she unwrapped it, her breath caught. It was a golden cross, heavy and ancient, its surface engraved with words she couldn't read. Around it were fragments of parchment, each covered in faded writing. Eli leaned closer, his voice low. "This ain't just a relic. It's a record. Proof of something the church buried centuries ago." The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. Her father hadn't been hiding gold. He'd been protecting a truth powerful enough to destroy reputations, maybe even entire legacies. She closed the crate slowly, her mind spinning with fear and awe. "If people find out about this," she said softly, "they'll come for the land. They'll come for us." Eli nodded. "That's why he kept it hidden. That's why he died keeping it that way." Clara looked around the cavern, at the symbols glowing faintly in the lantern light, and whispered, "Then it's my turn to keep the promise." When Clara and Eli emerged from the mine, the sky was streaked with fire, dawn spilling over the desert like a promise and a warning all at once. They sealed the entrance again, burying the key beneath a pile of stones. Neither spoke for a long while. The wind had changed. It carried a strange calm, like the desert itself approved of their silence. As they mounted their horses, Eli turned to her and said, "Some secrets ain't meant to be buried forever, just until the right hearts find them." Clara nodded, but deep down, she knew her father's secret would not rest easily. Back at the ranch, they began to rebuild in earnest. The old barn came alive again, the corral filled with the sounds of life, and the fields, long barren, started to green with the first shoots of grass after the rain. Clara worked harder than ever, her heart bound to the land like roots gripping stone. The people in town watched from afar, their curiosity slowly turning to respect. Yet she never told them what truly happened out in the desert. She let them believe whatever stories made them sleep at night. At night, she and Eli would sit by the fire, the journal open between them. They pieced together her father's story, tracing his words to the truth they now both guarded. Sometimes she wondered if they'd made the right choice, keeping it hidden. But every time she looked out at the horizon, at the gold glow of the sunset over her father's land, she felt peace. "He wanted this," she'd whisper. "Not for the world to know, but for the land to heal." Still, peace in the West never lasted long. One morning, a rider approached the ranch, dressed in a dark coat, his horse slick with sweat. He carried a badge polished to a silver gleam. "Marshall Barrett," he introduced himself. "I'm looking for a woman named Clara Miller. Heard she's been digging around where she shouldn't." Eli stepped forward, his hand resting near his holster. "She's not digging anything, Marshall. Just running her ranch." Barrett's eyes narrowed. Funny Folks say different. They say she found something out there. Something that don't belong to her. Clara felt her stomach tighten. The past she thought she'd buried was stirring again. She met the marshal's gaze with steady defiance. This land was my father's. Every inch of it belongs to me. Barrett tipped his hat. Maybe so. But secrets buried in government ground don't stay buried long. He turned his horse and rode off, leaving only dust behind. But his message was clear. The world beyond the ranch had caught wind of what she'd found. And this time, it wasn't gold they wanted. It was truth. The days that followed the marshal's visit were thick with unease. Every sound, every rustle of wind, every hoofbeat on the trail made Clara's heart tense. She and Eli spoke little, but both could feel the change. The desert no longer seemed quiet. It felt like it was watching. At night, they kept the lamps low, the rifles close. Clara spent hours rereading her father's journal, as if his words might tell her what to do next. She found an entry she had never noticed before, written in a faint, almost trembling hand. If the law comes, don't fight them with bullets. Fight them with truth, but only when you must. That sentence stayed with her. Truth, she realized, was heavier than any weapon. Her father hadn't wanted her to hide forever. He'd wanted her to protect wisely. As she sat by the firelight, the flames flickering across her weary face, Eli spoke softly. If Barrett comes back, he won't be alone. You know that, right? She nodded. Then we'll be ready. Eli looked at her, admiration and fear mixing in his eyes. You're your father's daughter, Clara. Maybe stronger, but she didn't feel strong. She felt like a storm waiting to break. A few days later, Barrett returned, with 3 armed men riding behind him. They rode straight through the gate, kicking up dust like a warning shot. Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand, her posture calm but unyielding. You're trespassing, Marshal, she said evenly. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the dry earth. I've got orders from the county, he said. Claims your land might sit on government property, old mining ground. We'll be searching it. Eli stepped forward, voice cold. You've got no right without proof. Barrett smirked. Proof's what I'm here to find. His men spread out, heading toward the barn. Clara's pulse quickened. She couldn't let them find the journal or the letters. The truth her father protected could destroy lives, and these men weren't here for justice. They were here for whatever they could claim. As Barrett approached, Clara lowered the rifle just slightly, her tone steady. You ever wonder why no one's mined this land in 50 years? She asked. Because the desert remembers, and it don't forgive thieves. Barrett hesitated for the first time. Maybe it was the way she said it, or maybe the stillness of the wind, but something in his face changed, uncertainty creeping in where arrogance had been. Behind him, one of his men shouted from the barn, Marshal, you'd better come see this. Barrett turned, muttering under his breath. Clara exchanged a quick glance with Eli, who whispered, We're out of time. Whatever waited in that barn, they knew, it would decide everything. Inside the barn, the air was heavy with dust and dread. Barrett and his men stood before the spot where Clara had once found the first chest. Only now, the floorboards had shifted, revealing a hollow space beneath. One of the men knelt and pried up a plank, his face pale. There's something here, sir, he muttered. Barrett gestured for the lantern. The light flickered across what lay beneath. An old wooden box, different from the others. Its lid was carved with markings none of them recognized. When Barrett reached for it, Clara's voice cut through the air like a blade. Don't. Everyone turned. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Barrett's. That box don't belong to you, or to the government. It belongs to history. And if you open it, you'll unleash something you can't put back. Barrett scoffed, but his hand trembled as he gripped the lid. You sound just like your old man, he said. He warned us too. Called it sacred. Called it cursed. He pulled the lid open anyway. A gust of wind burst through the barn, snuffing out the lantern. The horses outside neighed and thrashed in terror. The men stumbled back as a low hum filled the air, a sound that didn't come from any living thing. The very ground seemed to vibrate. Barrett dropped the lid, eyes wide. What the hell? He started, but the rest of his words were swallowed by the sound. The box's contents glimmered faintly in the moonlight streaming through the cracks. Ancient coins, a faded scroll, and something else, something glowing faintly gold. Then, as quickly as it began, the wind stopped. The hum faded. Silence returned. Barrett stared at the box, then at Clara, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Close it," she said, her voice trembling with power that wasn't entirely her own. "Now." He obeyed without argument, slamming the lid shut. The silence that followed was suffocating. Eli stepped beside her, hand still on his holster, though he knew no bullet could have stopped what they just felt. Barrett cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "No report'll mention this," he muttered. "I ain't seen nothing worth talking." He motioned to his men, and they left without another word, their fear hanging in the air like dust. Clara watched them disappear into the dawn, her heart pounding. Eli turned to her, on his eyes. "Whatever your father was guarding, it's bigger than all of us." Clara nodded, her gaze drifting toward the hills. "Then we guard it still." As the sun rose over the desert, the ranch stood silent but alive. The land glowed with a strange light, peaceful, powerful, eternal. The secret of the Miller Ranch had survived another dawn, hidden once more beneath sand and faith. And for the first time, Clara smiled, knowing her father's legacy wasn't just buried in gold or earth. It was alive in her, in every breath the desert took. The Old West, they said, was built on dust and blood. But on this land, it was built on something far rarer: honor. The sun dipped low across the horizon, setting the desert aflame in streaks of gold and crimson. Clara stood at the edge of the land her father once called home, the same land that had tested her, broken her, and ultimately rebuilt her into something stronger. The wind whispered through the fences and the barn doors, carrying with it the echoes of those who had come before. Her father, the men who had sworn their oath, and the countless souls who had poured their dreams into this unforgiving soil. The gold, the journals, the ancient relics, all of it was now part of the earth again. And for the first time, Clara understood what her father had meant when he said the land would take care of her. It wasn't about what it could give, it was about what it could teach. In that silent moment, she realized the true inheritance wasn't the treasure hidden beneath the dust. It was resilience, integrity, and faith. Her father's promise had never been about protecting riches. It had been about guarding truth. Every storm she had faced, every danger she had survived, had shaped her into the very kind of strength the Old West demanded. As the sky darkened into violet, Clara looked toward the distant canyon and whispered a quiet thank you. To her father, to the land, and to whatever force had kept her standing when the world tried to bury her. The ranch was no longer just a memory. It was alive again. The well ran clear, the fields grew green, and the once broken barn now stood tall against the desert winds. Travelers would sometimes pass by, seeing only a simple ranch, never knowing the history buried beneath their feet. And that was how Clara wanted it. The greatest stories of the West, she knew, were the ones never written down, those carried in silence, kept sacred by those strong enough to bear them. She had become part of that legacy, a living echo of the courage that built a nation from dust. Before walking back inside, Clara paused at the threshold of her father's barn. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of mesquite and rain. Somewhere, an owl called from the hills, and the stars began to burn bright overhead. "We did it, Pa," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "It's safe now." And in the faint rustle of the wind, she could have sworn she heard a reply, gentle, proud, eternal. The West was never kind, but it was fair, and those who honored its spirit always found a way to endure. Clara had done more than survive. She had become the heart of the land itself. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel to keep exploring tales of courage, faith, and redemption from the wild frontier. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you protect if the world tried to take it from you? And don't forget to like the video, so more souls could discover stories that remind us that even in the harshest deserts, hope can bloom again. Because sometimes the greatest gold we'll ever find is the one buried within us.